I don't think I have to remind any of you that it has been somewhat of an anxious season for us, hasn't it? I think even before this, a few years before 2020, there was actually a survey done on the things, the greatest temptations that people face. And right at the very top of that was stress and anxiety. That anxiousness is one of those things that's at the very top place of things that we battle in our lives. And then 2020 comes along and we kind of just added to that all the pressure it is. Even this week, you think about all the different things that we've experienced this week, the ways that you have watched your television screen and violence and destruction and pain and blaming and all the chaos that has been happening. And we realize once again, wow, how are we going to make it through this year? It's interesting. Every summer there is on the Discovery Network they do Shark Week, right? And we watch this, and then it seems just the perfect timing is that we get those drone shots right over Huntington, these juvenile great white sharks that are lurking right off the coast there. Anytime we're planning these summer beach baptisms, Pastor Amy's like, yeah, you guys are gonna have to baptize all of the people. And then we try to explain it all to her that, I don't know if you realize this, but less than one person, the average is one person in the United States dies from shark attacks. In fact, you're more likely to die from a trampoline accident or a vending machine falling on you. And I know that some of you are thinking is great. Now I don't only have to worry about sharks, I have to worry about vending machines as well. And so there is this way in which we let anxiousness kind of overwhelm us and take over our life. And as we've been thinking through this fall, we know that as we anticipate it, we've been making phone calls as a pastoral staff, thinking through and calling folks and thinking through a lot of the struggle that people are having. And as you think about the fall, how challenging it is going to be. Families that are feeling this pressure firsthand of really not knowing what they're going to do with their kids. How are we going to watch our kids? How are we going to go back to work? What's going to happen? We see people that are facing all kinds of challenges in their job situations, not knowing what's going on. We're reaching out to families who are feeling the tension of all the different issues that are taking place, calling our families, reaching out to our friends who are feeling this in a very deep and personal way. For some of us, we see it and we feel the tension, and others are living in the midst of this tension. Teachers and administrators, we've been calling folks, and some people have been asking, how's it? They know being a pastor's tough. And I think in some ways it's been a little easier the last couple of weeks because you're all yelling at the teachers and the administrators instead of the pastors for a change. And so we've had a little bit of break, but we feel the compassion, and we've been calling folks and just like, how are you doing? How are you navigating this? Listening to the tears of an elementary teacher who's trying to wonder, how in the world am I going to teach elementary kids online for a year? Parents feeling that same strain. Students who are wondering how they're going to build their resume for colleges and what are they going to miss out? Is life all going to get canceled on them again this year? And so all this pressure we feel, there's a pressure on our mental health and our emotional health and our spiritual health. And I think a lot of us feel this sense that we can't live like this much longer. Even pastors who, I read this week, pastors who are dealing with suicidal thoughts because they opened their churches so fast and they kind of disregarded some of the warnings, and people in their church got COVID, some who died and some who are feeling, was it my fault? Did I move too quickly? And all these things kind of move together for us to realize it is a unique year for us to try to make it. But these weeks have been good for us because Peter has given us a letter and he's helped us to think about how do we lean into the grace of God in the midst of pressure. And so as we've been looking together at this letter, we come to this interesting conclusion to his letter where he's going to speak into this and say, as he comes together, he's going to help us see that there is a way in which we can lean into the care of God. That we will be met with pressure in our lives, and just as that first audience was met with pressure, we are going to be met with pressure. But how do we face that pressure in the midst of the grace of God? How do we feel and experience the grace of God? And so what Peter's going to do in the final chapter of this letter together is he's going to give us the ability to think about how do we manage this pressure? How do we find care in the midst of burden? And so he's going to close out and he gives us an idea. There's this beautiful idea that's sandwiched in, and it's a perfect big idea for us to think about today. And here's our big idea we're going to look at. The call that we will see, the literal words of Peter today are cast all your burdens on God because he cares for you. Cast all your burdens on God because he cares for you. Some of your translations might be cast all your cares or your anxieties. But what we're going to see is that Peter's going to sandwich into all these instructions on how we find care in the midst of pressure. He's going to say, in the midst of all this, you don't have to hold on to this. You don't have to fight this on your own. And so he's going to walk us into this. And so wrapped into this chapter is this beautiful image of God's care for us in the midst of pressure. And so let me invite you to turn to 1 Peter chapter 5. 1 Peter chapter 5, this final chapter in this letter. Now, what Peter's been doing, what we've seen is this idea of truth in action, truth in action. He helps us see in some ways something that is true about God. And as a response, then how do we live? If this is true, if this is what God has done, then how do we live in response to this? And so we've seen different ideas that trials are going to come your way, but we find joy because we know that just as Christ has suffered for us, he is refining us through these sufferings. We've been invited to submit ourselves under the care of one who cares for us, that Jesus, just as he submitted his life to God. And chapter 4, he begins this, or he ended this idea again of the beauty of Christ's return, Christ's victory. And so in light of this, he continues to let us see something big that God is doing and then call us into something. And so he begins this final exhortation, verse 1. He says this, he says, to the elders among you, I appeal as a fellow elder and a witness of Christ's sufferings, who also will share in the glory to be revealed. Be shepherds of God's flock that is under your care, watching over them, not because you must, but because you are willing, as God wants you to be, not pursuing dishonest gain, but eager to serve, not lording it over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory that will never fade away. In the same way, you who are younger, submit yourself to your elders. All of you clothe yourselves with humility toward one another, because God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Let's stop there for a minute, because we see that one of the ways that God cares for his followers is that he provides godly leaders. In fact, this is the first thing I want you to see. There's two things we're going to look at today as practical ways in which Peter's inviting us to cast our cares on God. And one of the things that he says is to place ourselves under the care of godly leaders. To place ourselves under the care of godly leaders, that this call, and it's an interesting image, isn't it? That the imagery that he has of the leaders who will care for you is that they are to be shepherds. It's an image, it's a careful image, it's a caring image. And it's one that Peter has experienced firsthand in a couple ways. You can think of the way that Peter sat under Jesus and Jesus tried to describe the good shepherd. He described himself, the difference between him, the good shepherd versus the thief versus the hired hand. But the good shepherd, he says, lays down his life for his sheep. And of course, Peter watched firsthand the way that Jesus not only spoke of this, but the way that he lived this. But also remember that there was this moment after Peter found himself failing Jesus, that he meets the risen Jesus, and they're sitting by this fire, and Peter is being restored. He's asking him, Peter, do you love me? 3 different times he asks this question, and each time as Peter says, Lord, you know I love you, the Lord's response to Peter is, feed my sheep, care for my lambs, feed my lambs. It's an image of shepherding. It is this careful image to care for them. And what Peter has done, notice what he's done this, is he's come and he says, he's taken a very humble approach. He says, to my fellow elders, he's come side by side to them. He's not trying to have a position of authority and speak down to them, but to say side by side, hey, we have a job to do. We need to care for these people. Here's how we do this. And I think those of you know, this role it's hard, it's difficult. It's one that comes under greater judgment, and so you don't walk into it lightly. But we realize is that you do not do it for dishonest gain. You do not do it to manipulate or have power. You do it because you are willing. Now, I have a strange painting in my office. It's called The Lazy Shepherd. And those who would do probably counseling with me would probably wonder why I have this, but it's an image of a shepherd running away from his flock. And the image is a reminder of the work it takes, the willingness it takes to protect the flock. See, Jesus said the hired hand don't care about the flock. When they face trouble, they run away. And it's an image to me, it's a reminder to me and to our team that we have to protect, we have to care, we have to look over those that are entrusted into our care. And so every week I remind myself of these things, and I thank God for this. Now, being called to this and trying to motivate yourself to this doesn't mean that it makes it any less difficult. Some of you may have seen this photo just to kind of give you a perspective of what it's been like to be a pastor and a shepherd in 2020 or 2020. Think about this image of Tom Hanks. Maybe we can think of it in different roles he's played. For some of you, you can see what it was like in 2019, and for others, what you understand what it's been like in 2020. It has been a little crazy. But one of the things that I think is so important is that this is a challenging church. And this is a church with long history, over 115, 116 years of history. And so we have people here with deep, deep roots, and yet we've seen this powerful renewal in our church over the last 10 years. And so there are some people, I realize, I've seen this even over the last few weeks, they're not even sure I'm real. They're not sure I'm not a Chuck E. Cheese, a puppet that is, they kind of realize when they see me up close, like, oh, you're actually a real person. Some of them have never had a chance. But one of the core things that we care about here is to be relational and to be caring in this way, to think about transformation. And so our strategy across every generation then is to shepherd well. And so one of the things that we do here that it really in light of this passage, in light of so many others, is we realize if we're going to shepherd well with a church our size, then we have to raise up other shepherds. And so many of you, I can even see in the room here, and I know many of you who are watching online, that you have said yes to this role. People who are leading small groups of people from third grade all the way to our senior adults. Over 100 people who serve as shepherds. Who have taken a little flock under their care and who not just facilitate a group discussion, but who really try to make sure that this group is building a life of love and care, that there's accountability and responsibility, that the people in this group really do want to develop a life together. And I'm so thankful for that. I'm thankful for the ways that this is happening. And so thank you to all of you shepherds, all of you who are with us. But this is one of those things that our motivation has to be God's glory, has to be wanting to see people developed by him, cared for by him. And one of the things that you see in this passage, in this beginning part, that's so important for us to understand is you're not meant to go through this alone. The things that you're struggling with are not meant to be things that you are supposed to face alone. And so the idea of the shepherds is the idea of what God did from the very beginning. Here's Jesus' vision, that as people were coming into faith, they were put into a community of faith. And so while faith is dynamically personal, it was never meant to be private. It's meant to be lived with others. You're meant to be cared for by others. And so one of the things that he is making known is shepherds tend to the flock, help those that are going through these trials, that are going through these pressures. Make sure there is a network of care. And so this imagery is so important. One of the things I want to make an appeal to you is this: as the fall is being prepared, as we're getting ready to launch in a couple weeks, I want to challenge you to get into a life group if you're not already, to find yourself growing alongside other people. You're going to need it. You need other people. You need people who will care for you. You need people who will watch over you and help you. And you need to be in the lives of others as well. And so you can go to beachpoint.com or on our app. You can sign up if you're not already in. There's a little interest form, and you can let us know how you would, what might work for you. We're going to do, we've never done this before. We're doing something called the marriage course. We already have 20 couples, 40 people that are going to be going through it. We have room for 10 more couples that want to go through this. And so if you're married or you're close to getting married and you're thinking about this, I would love for you to spend 7 weeks with us. The discussions for you guys will be private between you and your spouse, but there's a chance for us also to be together and kind of learn a little bit together as well. So there's so many opportunities to fall. Parents, encourage your kids to be in a life group, whether it's with kids or middle school or high school or young adults, because these shepherds want to come alongside of you. They know how hard it is for you on your own, but they want to reinforce the things that you are trying to build into the lives of your kids. And so we want to surround ourselves with godly leaders, with godly shepherds. Well, look at verse 6 then. There's a second thing that he asks us to do. Verse 6. He continues this idea of humility. He says, humble yourselves therefore under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in the faith, because you know the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kinds of suffering. And the God of all grace, who called you into his eternal glory in Christ, after you have suffered a little while, will himself restore you and make you strong, firm, and steadfast. To him be the power forever and ever. Amen. Now, he continues this idea of humility. It is moved from this image of a good shepherd to a mighty God. It's a powerful imagery. You see that he talks about the mighty hand of God. And when we hear this imagery of the mighty hand of God, it's imagery to take us back to the Exodus. Because it's the explanation of it was with a mighty hand that God changed the fate of the people that were in slavery. It was with a mighty hand that he brought them out of Egypt. It was with a mighty hand that he turned a sea into a highway. It is with a mighty hand that he rose Jesus from the dead. It is with a mighty hand in the same way that he now comes in our life. And so here's the second thing that Peter encourages us. He says this: to place ourselves under the care of a mighty God. To place yourselves under the care of a mighty God. On the one hand, we place ourselves under the care of gentle shepherds. On the other hand, we place ourselves under the care of a mighty God. And he gives us good reasons for this. Again, the humility as we see this. Now, notice one of the things that's so important in this text is that he encouraged you to cast your cares, cast your anxieties on him, because he cares for you. So the image first is of this mighty God, but then he brings into the balance the way that God cares. And it's important that you understand something. That image of cares, it is present. It is active. It is not something that he has done just at the cross, but it's something he does today. It is something he does now in your life. He cares for you even now. It is present and personal. And he is delighted to care for you. He is delighted for you to bring the things that are burdening you onto him. And so again, the invitation is to enter into his presence. This invitation of not carrying our burden by ourselves, of trusting it's a godly people that can be around us, godly leaders, but also to turn those things over to God. Those are the same things. We see this so many different times in scriptures, right? To not to be anxious, but to pray. To not worry, but to look at the way God cares. And again, the exhortation is you don't have to be overwhelmed by these things. Enter into the presence of God. Now, one of the reasons why this is so important is also because you see that you have an adversary. You have someone who's working against you. And so he calls us again, you see, to be sober-minded. Now, I don't know if you're keeping track, but this is the third time that he's said this in this letter, to be clear-minded, sober-minded, be alert, pay attention. And here's why. Because you have an adversary, you have an enemy, the devil, who prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour, to take in one whole bite, that his interest is in your destruction. And so notice what he's doing. He's trying to help you understand his character. He comes at you. He's working against you. He's an adversary. And so he's asking us to keep an alertness, to control our thinking. Control your thinking. Watch how you think about things. Because this one who's working against you wants to get into your thoughts and wants to change the way you think about things. On the one hand, it's temptation, right? It is, you should give in because you're going to anyway. So you might as well just give in now. And it's the subtlety of, you're not going to win this battle, so give in to the battle. And what we know is that's not the truth. Paul writes that there is no temptation that will overtake you except that which is common to what we face. And God is faithful. He'll always give you a way out. And so when those lies come, when that deception comes, the second deception that comes is about identity, isn't it? It's about thinking that you don't matter to God, that God is not present for you, that God is off to something bigger than what you are facing, what you are burdened with. And so he's calling them to trust in the mighty hand of God, to be alert and aware of the one who comes against them. Now, for those in that day, it was pretty significant. In that time, the emperors of their time, they were devils themselves in flesh. Nero, Domitian, they did terrible things to the believers. What began in this letter as kind of the sense of pressure against them, verbally, maybe vocationally, turned violent. Eventually, these first Christians found themselves in a very, very desperate place. And these emperors, if the Christians were not willing to worship them as gods themselves, found themselves facing all kinds of pressure. When Nero, the great fire took place over Rome, Nero blamed the Christians. And a great persecution took place of these Christians. And when we see words like these fiery ordeals that they're facing, some scholars see this as whether or not it was either happening or would happen. But we know that Nero would take Christians. He would drop them in pitch. He'd put them on a pole. He'd light them on fire and light up his garden. We know other Christians, this idea of a roaring lion was very real to them. As they were placed under skins, they were thrown into a Colosseum. And for sport and for entertainment. A few years back, I got a chance to visit the Colosseum. And on the one hand, you kind of are taken in history, right? You're seeing something that's thousands of years old. We get excited here in our area because your house maybe is 50 years old and you think it's old. And you're sitting in the Colosseum. But at some point, the gravity of the moment hit me. And realizing the brothers and sisters who had gone before us, who had given their lives in faithfulness. They would not bow down. They would not give up their faith. They continued to believe in him who is faithful. And they persevered. You place yourself into the care of a mighty God. Now, Peter's whole letter has been an exhortation and encouragement to the Christians that they would live faithful, obedient lives, that they would be good citizens. They'd be the kind of citizens whose their life, as they lived out their life, they would show that there is something different about who they are and who our God is. And this is what he's been calling. He ends with these words, verse 12. With the help of Silas, in whom I regard as a faithful brother, I have written to you briefly, encouraging you and testifying that this is the true grace of God. Stand fast in it. She who is in Babylon, chosen together with you, sends you her greetings, and so does my son Mark. Greet one another with a kiss of love. Well, verse 14 is not going to be happening in COVID season, so we'll figure out an elbow bump or something else. But the most important thing he ends with is this challenge, right? Stand fast in your faith. Stand firm, stand strong where you are. Don't give up ground. Stand where you are. That you may find yourself, because of the pressure or because of the burdens, having doubts. And he's saying, don't give up. Don't give up. Don't give up on your life. Don't give up on your faith. Don't give up on the Lord. Stand fast in him. And he's changed the focus of our lives and the pressure we face to the grace of our Lord in the life that he's given to us, to the victory of the resurrection, to the glory of his coming. He's trying to shift our focus to what we're experiencing now, to what Christ has done, what he is doing, and what he will do. And this has been his message to us. Over these 5 chapters, his message to us has been this: stay faithful. Don't give up. Stay faithful. And so as you think about these 5 chapters and all these challenges, let me encourage you over the next couple of days to think about this question. What is one thing from these words, this letter, this series that you need to be focused on for your own development? What is one thing Peter has been trying to impress upon his readers, his listeners, as this letter passes around? What is one thing that you need to be focused on? Maybe it is the idea of a beautiful life. Maybe it's the idea of living such a beautiful life that those around you would see in you something that is so different than what they see in the rest of the world. Maybe it is the sense that while you are experiencing trials of all kinds, that you are to be patient in them, that God's not done with you, that he is refining you, that he is building your faith in your life. Maybe it's the focus on his return. It is hearing Peter's words again and again of the imminent return of Christ and not trying to figure out which political leader fits into which symbolic moment of the scriptures. I mean, people have been doing that the last 50 years and getting it wrong for 50 years, but that was never Peter's focus. His focus is that you would be ready, that your character would be ready, that your holiness would be ready when you meet Jesus. It's not about trying to figure out all those signs. It's about having your heart, your life, your family ready for that reunion. What is it that Peter's impressed upon us that you need to lean into in this next season? So as we close, we'll sing this final song together. And I want to encourage you to let this final song be an invitation, really a prayer of your heart. That it is a call for us to come to him. And whatever it is that has been making us anxious, and whatever trial it is that we are enduring, and whatever burden that we feel we've been carrying over these weeks, that we know now that we can come to him. That he calls us, he says that he cares for you. He cares for you in this moment. He cares that you are feeling this, and maybe you've got a little bit, you've gotten a 50-minute break from the pain, or a 50-minute break from the stress. But you know an hour, a half a day, tomorrow, it's coming again. You see the wave on the horizon rolling in. And he's saying you don't have to face that alone. And so as we sing this final song, let it be a song in which we come to him. That as we go into the fall, no matter what pressure we are facing, we will lean into the grace that is there for us in Jesus. Let's pray for that.